A garden past midnight, the kind of dark that has a weight to it. Old olive trees, gnarled and low, their trunks split open by centuries. The ground underneath them is packed hard and cold, and a man is lying face down in that dirt. Not kneeling, not bowing his head politely the way we do. Face down in the dust, with the sweat running off him in the cool night air. He is hours from arrest. He is one day from a Roman cross, and he is praying the hardest prayer any human being has ever prayed. Somewhere behind him, his closest friends are asleep. They cannot keep their eyes open. Somewhere out beyond the trees, a man named Judas is moving through the dark with soldiers and torches. Close now, closer with every minute. And the man in the dirt knows it. He can feel the whole weight of what is coming pressing down on his chest. And the very first word out of his mouth, the first word, is a word that millions of people today will tell you means daddy. Sit with how strange that is. A man at the edge of execution. A man staring straight down the barrel of the worst night in human history. And we have been told that in that moment he reached for the smallest, softest, most childish word in the language. The word a toddler babbles before it can walk. That is not what happened. And the gap between what this word has been turned into and what it actually carried is one of the most quietly staggering things hiding anywhere in the New Testament. You have heard the cozy version. Someone lowers their voice in a sermon and says that when Jesus prayed in the garden, the word he used was Abba. And Abba, they tell you, is just the baby talk word a tiny child uses for its father. Daddy, Papa, it sounds beautiful. It feels close. It has been preached in 10,000 churches and printed in 100 books. And every single person who ever said it was trying to help you feel how near God is. There is just one problem. It is not true, and not in the cold way, where someone wants to drain all the warmth out of your prayers and hand you a rule book instead. The warmth is real. The closeness is real. This word carries a tenderness that should stop you in your tracks. The daddy picture got that part right. What it left out is the other half of the word, and that other half is the part that makes the tenderness almost unbearable. So here is what we are going to do. We are not going to strip the affection out of this word. We are going to find out what it actually held, and we are going to walk, step by step, toward the moment that same word climbs up out of your own chest, and you finally understand what you are saying. This is not a story about grammar. This is not a story about a translation footnote. This is not a story about scholars arguing over dead languages. This is a story about a locked door, and the price somebody paid to get you through it. Stay with me. Start with the word underneath the word. In Aramaic, the everyday street language Jesus spoke in the markets and dusty synagogues of Galilee, the basic, ordinary word for father is Av. Short, plain, a building block of the language, the way cat or run is a building block of ours. Hebrew shares the exact same root, and you can hear it buried inside names you already know. Abraham, Abimlech, Abinadab. That little Ab sound sitting at the front of each of those names, that is the father. Now, Aramaic does something to that word. It has a grammatical form the scholars call the emphatic state, and you do not need one day of grammar school to feel what it does. Think about the difference between saying father and saying the father. Think about the difference between a king and the king. One is a category. The other is a person standing right in front of you. The emphatic state takes the plain little word and gives it a kind of definiteness, a settledness, this one right here quality. When Av steps into that form, it becomes Abba. So Abba is not some separate, mystical baby word floating apart from father. It is the word for father dressed in its most direct and personal form. It is the word you reach for when you turn and speak to the man himself, face to face, in the same room. That already bends the popular story out of shape. But the real evidence, the evidence that shatters the daddy myth completely, is in who actually used this word. And here is where it gets remarkable. Grown sons used Abba for their fathers. Not toddlers, grown men's, grown daughters used it too. It shows up as a term of deep respect for honored teachers. The way a devoted student, a man with a beard of his own, might address the master he revered above all others. In the rabbinic traditions of that whole period, you can find respected teachers, men of real standing and learning, who carried Abba as a personal name their entire adult lives. Let that land. Picture our word daddy. It belongs to the early years, doesn't it? It has a shelf life. A grown man does not stand up in a business meeting and call someone daddy. The word stays small because it is meant to stay small. Now set that beside the fact that Abba was the word a devoted student used for an elderly teacher, whose every sentence he treasured. It was a title of honor you could lay on the shoulders of a wise old master. That tells you everything. The tenderness in this word never once canceled the respect. It was the word a grown man used walking through his father's door at the end of a long day. Warm, yes. The family word. The intimate word. The word no stranger on earth would dare to use. And weighty at the very same time. Closeness and honor, riding together in a single breath. And nobody who spoke the language felt the slightest tension between the two. Hold that. The whole thing turns on it. Closeness and honor together, with no contradiction. Keep it in your hand as we walk. Now, to feel why Jesus using this word was so shocking, you have to understand how Israel had talked to God for most of its history. God as Father is in the Old Testament. It is there, but it is rarer than most people think, and it works differently than you would expect. When the Hebrew scriptures call God a father, they almost always mean the father of the whole nation. He is Israel's father, the one who dragged an entire people out of slavery and carried them like a son through the wilderness. You can hear it in the Song of Moses, when he turns to the people and asks whether this is really how they repay the Father who made them. You can hear it in the prophets, crying out that God is their Father even when every earthly comfort has burned to the ground. But notice what is happening in every one of those passages. It is corporate. It is a whole people together as a nation, calling God Father because of a shared history. What you almost never find anywhere is a single ordinary person turning to God and saying, simply quietly, "My Father." That kind of personal address was rare to the point of being remarkable. Now, let's be honest here, because this is exactly the sort of claim people love to overstate. Some teachers will tell you no Jew ever called God Father until Jesus came along. That goes too far, and it is not true. There are ancient Jewish prayers that begin, "Our Father, our King." The tradition of God as the compassionate Father of his people runs deep and old. So the honest version is not that the word was unheard of. The striking thing is how Jesus used it. He turned to God and called him Father directly, personally, constantly, as the natural, primary, effortless way he related to him. Open the Gospels and listen to him pray, and almost every single time that is the word on his lips. "Father, my Father." He did it so often, and so intimately that it clearly was not a formula he had memorized somewhere. It was the center of how he knew God. And then he did something even more startling. He handed the word away. He turned to fishermen, tax collectors, ordinary, unremarkable, uneducated people, and he taught them to begin their prayers the exact same way he began his. "When you pray," he said, "say, 'Our Father.'" Stop on that handoff because it is easy to blow right past how strange it is. This was a culture that guarded the holiness of God with breathtaking care. The most sacred name of God was considered too holy to even pronounce out loud. To this day it is written but not spoken. That is the world we are standing in. A world where you did not throw God's name around casually, where you approached the divine with your sandals off and your eyes down. And into that careful, trembling, reverent world, Jesus turns to a crowd of nobodies and tells them that they may speak to the Most High the same way he does. Not the distant father of a whole nation, addressed from far off. Their Father, yours, spoken directly to his face, using the family word. The God whose name could barely be breathed out loud is suddenly the God you are invited to call by the name a grown son uses when he walks in the door. That should have made their heads spin. Most of us have heard Our Father so many times that the shock has been worn completely smooth. But the first people ever to pray it were stepping onto ground that had been roped off for 1,000 years. Here's the part nobody tells you. Now watch where this word actually shows up in the New Testament, because the first place it appears tells you almost everything. Back to the garden. The Passover meal is over. Judas is out there somewhere in the black, moving with the temple guard. The disciples are a stone's throw off, heavy-eyed, sliding down into the sleep that will humiliate them for the rest of their lives. And Jesus is on the ground, This is the moment Mark chose to preserve the actual Aramaic word that came out of Jesus' mouth. Not a paraphrase, not a translation, the real sound he made in his own language, kept untranslated on the page so that 2,000 years later you would hear it. And he said, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I want, but what you want." Sit inside that sentence for a second. If Abba were only the tiny, simple baby word we have shrunk it down to, this is the single strangest place in all of Scripture to find it. Because what is happening in this garden is the most grown-up moment in the history of the world. A son fully aware of what is racing toward him, staring straight at the cost, naming his own dread out loud, not hiding it, not dressing it up, and then choosing his father's will over his own terror. And the word holds both of those at once. There is the raw, unguarded closeness of a child who can ask his father for anything in the universe, who can say, "Take this cup," without softening it, without pretending it doesn't hurt. And there is the surrendered trust of a grown man who can finish that very same sentence with, "Yet not what I want, but what you want." That is the deepest form of intimacy there is, the kind that can be completely honest about its fear and completely yielded in its trust, both at once, with neither one canceling the other out. A small child reaches for this word and means love. A grown son reaches for it and means love that has counted the cost, stared at the price, and stayed anyway. The word was roomy enough to hold both, and in the garden, it is the grown son's whole broken heart. So when someone tells you this word just means daddy, it is worth gently asking whether that one little English word can carry the whole weight of Gethsemane. It carries the warmth, sure. What it cannot carry is the reverence, the surrender, the blood in the dirt. Here's the part where the Bible writers settle the question themselves. And the beauty of it is you do not have to trust a single scholar to see it. You only have to notice what is sitting right there on the page. The word Abba appears exactly 3 times in the entire New Testament. Once in the garden, in Mark's account, and twice more in the letters of Paul, once in Romans, once in Galatians. 3 times, that's it. And every single time, all 3, the Aramaic word Abba is immediately followed by the same Greek phrase, ho pater. The Father. Stop and think about what that pattern is doing. These writers preserved a foreign word their Greek-speaking readers could not understand on their own. And then, right beside it, they translated it for them. They told you outright what it means. And the word they reached for was ho pater, the ordinary, dignified, full-weight Greek word that simply means father. If they had heard Abba as something smaller, something cute, something babyish, Greek had ways to say that. They didn't use them. Not once. All 3 times, they reached for the full, honorable, grown word. Let that land. The people closest to the source, the ones writing while the language was still alive and breathing on their own tongues, looked straight at Abba and rendered it Father. They heard the warmth. They kept the intimacy by preserving the original sound, and they translated it with every ounce of its weight intact. The text translates itself, and when it does, it quietly disagrees with the bumper sticker. If this is the kind of thing that makes you want to open your Bible and look closer, that is the entire reason this channel exists. Take 1 second and subscribe. It genuinely is how these studies find the people who need them. And tell me in the comments right now, before today, had you always been taught that Abba meant daddy? I want to see how deep this one goes. Now back to the garden, and to a question that has probably been forming in the back of your mind for a few minutes. If the word never actually meant daddy, where did the daddy idea come from in the first place? Somebody started it, and the story of how it started is more gracious than you would expect. It came from a good place. That part matters. This is not a tale about somebody being careless or foolish. A respected scholar, a man named Joachim Jeremias, working in Europe in the middle of the last century, noticed something completely, genuinely real. He saw that Jesus addressed God as Father with a directness and a frequency that truly stood out against the prayer practices of his time. People in that world did not usually turn to the Almighty and speak so plainly, so personally, so intimately. Jesus did, constantly, and this scholar wanted to capture just how startling that closeness would have felt to the people who first heard it. Somewhere in reaching for an image vivid enough to carry it, the comparison to a small child's first words slipped into the conversation. The picture of a little one looking up and saying the simplest, most trusting word it knows. It was warm, it was unforgettable, and it spread like a grass fire in a dry summer. The cozy informality of it landed in sermons and study guides and devotional books all over the world. Because honestly, it felt so good to hear. The God of thunder and smoke and holiness, the one who fills the temple until the priests can't stand up, and you get to call him by the tender little name a toddler uses. Who wouldn't want that to be true? Who wouldn't repeat a line that lovely? But other scholars kept digging, the way careful people always go back and test a beautiful claim to be sure it holds. They combed through the ancient prayers, the rabbinic texts, the way real people used this word in real life. And what they found was that the word was even fuller than the short version had suggested. The warmth was all there, but so was the honor. The daddy picture had grabbed the tenderness and quietly set the dignity off to one side. And the dignity turned out to matter just as much. And here is the most gracious part of the whole thing. The scholar who started it walked it back himself. Before he died, in his later writing, he added a careful word of caution to everyone who had run with his idea. He said, in essence, that picturing Jesus as talking the way a tiny child talks went further than the evidence allowed. And he was honest enough to admit he had once leaned that way himself. Think about that for a moment. The man who lit the match was also the man who tried hardest to stamp it out. But the popular version had already run faster than the correction could ever catch it. That is what happens with a really good line. It outruns the truth, and the truth spends years jogging along behind it, waving its arms, trying to flag it down. So none of this is about catching anyone out. It is certainly not about looking down on the faithful teachers who passed, Daddy, along. They were handing people something true, that God is near, that he is reachable, that you can come close. The instinct was exactly right. The word simply holds more than they had room to say. And why did the shorter version take hold so warmly? The answer is tender, and it's worth naming. It took hold because it was reaching for something true. People are starving for nearness to God. So many had spent years picturing him as severe and cold and distant. Arms folded, impossible to please. So when someone said, he is close enough to call Daddy, it landed like cold water on a burning throat. That hunger was right. And here is the good news. The fuller word does not pull the nearness back. It goes deeper. People reached for Daddy because they wanted to come close. The whole word tells them they are closer than they ever dared to hope, and that the closeness will hold. Because it is large, that is exactly what gets thrown in the trash when we shrink this word down. Go to Paul, go to the two places he reaches for Abba, and you will see precisely why the grown-up reading matters so much. The mature word does not cool the comfort down. It gives the comfort something solid to stand on. Pay attention to this. In his letter to the Galatians, Paul is describing a change of legal status. He talks about people who were once like slaves, or like underage children with no rights to the family estate, no claim on the inheritance, no standing of their own, property almost, on the outside looking in. And then something decisive happens. God sent forth his Son, Paul writes, to redeem those who were under the law so that we might receive adoption as sons. And because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying, Abba, Father. Read that slowly because it is doing something enormous. This is not a sentimental scene. This is a courtroom and a family at the very same time. Adoption, in the Greek and Roman world Paul was writing into, was not a soft gesture. It was one of the most serious, binding legal acts a person could perform. The Greek word is huiothesia, the placing of a son. Under Roman law, a father could take a person who had absolutely no claim on him, no blood, no birthright, no standing, and make that person a full and permanent heir. The same legal standing as a child born into the house. Old debts wiped clean. The new name impossible to undo. You were brought in from the outside and handed an inheritance that no court on earth could take back. And here is the detail that will stay with you. A slave did not get to use the family word. A hired worker did not. A stranger off the road did not. Only a son. So when Abba comes climbing up out of your own mouth, you are not working yourself into a warm feeling. You are stating a fact about who you have become. And watch the proof Paul points to. The evidence that this staggering adoption is real and not just wishful thinking is the cry itself. The very same word Jesus prayed face down in the garden is now rising up out of your chest. The Spirit of the Son places the Son's own word on your lips. You cry Abba because that is what he cries. The simple fact that you can say it at all is the receipt, the proof that you genuinely belong inside the family now. But it gets stranger and better. That same cry shows up again in Paul's letter to the Romans, and there he blows it wide open. In Romans, Paul sets two spirits against each other. There is the spirit of slavery, the one that drags you back into fear, always anxious, always bracing for the next punishment, never sure of your footing in the house, never sure you won't be thrown back out into the cold. And then there is the spirit God actually gave you, the spirit of adoption, the one who teaches your heart to cry Abba. To call God by the family name is to stop flinching like a slave and start resting like a child. And then Paul says something that should steady you on your absolute worst day. That same spirit, he writes, bears witness alongside your own spirit that you really are a child of God. There will be mornings you do not feel like one. Mornings when the evidence of your own heart seems to argue the other way. Mornings when the accusation feels truer than the promise. And into exactly those mornings, Paul says God himself testifies, underneath your doubt, deeper than your feelings, that the adoption stands. The cry in your chest never once depended on your performance. It is God bearing witness to his own work. And if a child, Paul goes on, then an heir of God and a fellow heir with Christ. The word Abba opens straight onto an inheritance, the same standing the Son has by nature. You are handed by adoption. And Paul will not even let the suffering of this life undo it. The present hardship, he says, is not worth comparing to the glory that is coming. The end of fear, the witness of the Spirit, the inheritance, the glory, all of it folded up inside the word some people thought meant nothing more than daddy. That is so much heavier than daddy could ever be. Daddy makes the whole thing cute and a little fragile, like a warm feeling that might fade by Tuesday. Adoption makes it solid. It makes it yours on purpose, permanently, at a price somebody else was willing to pay. And that price is the part we cannot leave unspoken, because it is the reason any of us can say the word at all. Go back to the garden one more time, but look at it from a different angle now. When Jesus prayed Abba in Gethsemane, he was speaking out of a relationship that was his by nature. He had always been the Son. There was never a single moment when he stood outside the family looking in. The word was simply true of him, the way it is true that water is wet. You and I are in a completely different position. By nature, the New Testament says it plainly, we were outsiders, strangers to the family, no claim on the inheritance, no right to the name. So how does an outsider come to cry the very same word the eternal Son cries? Only one way. Somebody on the inside has to bring you in. And bringing you in cost him the exact thing the garden was about. The cup he begged to have taken away was not taken away. He drank it, all of it. He drank it down to the bottom, so that the family word could become yours. You cry Abba because he cried it first, and because he walked out of that garden and let them take him, and went to a cross to make room for you inside the only family that word belongs to. So every single time the word forms in your chest, it carries the memory of that garden. The closeness you feel was purchased in the place where the Son sweated blood into the dirt and surrendered his own will. That is why this word can never be cheap, no matter how tenderly you mean it. The intimacy is real precisely because it was bought at a real and terrible price. Now there is a ditch on the other side of this road, and we have to name it before we finish, because falling into it will cost you just as much as the cozy mistake we started with. Some people hear Abba does not mean daddy, and they swing all the way to the opposite extreme. They decide the intimacy itself must have been the error. They conclude that God is formal and distant after all, that they had better keep their voice down and their requests small, and their hearts at a careful, respectful distance. They take the correction and build a wall out of it. That reading misses just as badly, and in some ways it does more damage, because it shoves you away from the very nearness this word was built to give you. The careful reading does not take the closeness away. It takes the smallness away. There is a world of difference between those two things. You are still invited, urgently, sincerely, unbelievably, to speak to God with a directness that should knock the wind out of you when you stop and think about who He is. You can bring Him your fear. You can bring Him your honest, unedited, take this cup. You can bring Him your half-finished, stammering, 3 in the morning sentences that don't even know how they want to end. The garden settled that forever. What you are not invited to do is treat Him as though He were less than God, as though holiness and warmth could not possibly live together inside one small word. But they can. They do. They always have. A grown son standing in front of a father he genuinely loves and reveres does not stop loving the man in order to honor him. He does not stop honoring him in order to love him. He does both in the same breath, without any strain at all. That is the entire point of this word. Lose either side, and the whole thing collapses. Make it only warm, and you get a buddy in the sky. Make it only formal, and you get a distant magistrate. Hold both, and you get the actual living God, near enough to call by the family name, holy enough to mean it. Let me leave you with a picture. A working estate, somewhere in the ancient Near East. A wide, dusty courtyard, stair rooms along the walls, the smell of dust and olives and animals in the warm afternoon air. An old landowner sits in the shade, in the cool part of the day, getting on in years. And a son crosses that courtyard. Not a boy, a fully grown man. A man who has been trusted, over long years, with real responsibility. The keys to the storehouses hang from his belt. He has the authority to make deals in his father's name. He carries the standing of a true heir, the one who will one day inherit all of it. The land, the flocks, the whole household. He walks across that courtyard at the end of a long day of running the place. He sees his father resting in the shade, and he calls out the exact same word he called out when he was 5 years old, and came running across those same stones on small, unsteady legs. Abba. Nothing about the word has shrunk in all those years. He is not a child anymore. The servants answer to him now, but the name has not changed, because the relationship underneath it has not changed. It has only deepened and driven its roots down further. The closeness of the boy and the dignity of the heir, both of them riding on one small, ordinary word, with no tension between them anywhere. That is the word Jesus prayed in the garden. That is the word the Spirit teaches you to pray. Not a small word for a small moment. The deep, clear-eyed trust of a grown child who understands everything, including exactly what it will cost, and who still says, "Father, I am yours. So what do you actually do with this, sitting wherever you happen to be right now? Maybe you have kept God at arm's length your whole life. You believe He is real. You believe He is holy. But the idea of actually being close to Him feels presumptuous, almost rude. Like sitting down in a chair that clearly belongs to someone far more important than you. If that is you, hear what the word says back. If you are in Christ, the chair is yours. You were adopted into the family on purpose, at a tremendous price, and the arrangement is permanent. You do not have to earn your slow way up to the front of the room while everybody watches. You are already a son, already a daughter, already an heir, with the inheritance already signed over in your name. The cry in your chest is the receipt. Or maybe your situation is the exact opposite. Maybe somewhere along the way, God quietly became too familiar. A buddy, a vending machine you visit when you need something. Someone you talk at far more than you ever stop and listen to. If that is you, let the full weight of the word find you again. The same God you get to call Abba is the God whose will Jesus surrendered to with his face pressed into the cold ground of a garden. Nearness was never meant to cancel reverence. It was meant to make reverence warm, and warmth deep instead of cheap. And maybe you were in the garden yourself tonight, facing your own cup, the thing you would give almost anything to have pass from you. The diagnosis, the empty chair at the table, the door that closed and will not open again, the fear that wakes you before dawn and sits on your chest with its whole weight. If that is where you are, listen very closely to how the prayer in the garden actually goes. It does not pretend the fear isn't there. It says the hard thing out loud. All of it, every bit of the take this cup. And then, only then, it leans its entire weight back into the one who can be trusted with the answer. Whatever the answer turns out to be, you are allowed to pray exactly like that. You are permitted to be that honest, and that surrendered in the very same breath. That has never been weakness. It is the sound a grown child makes when he trusts a good father in the dark. Here is where we land. The cozy version was always too small for the truth it was trying to hold. It made the wonder about the word, when the wonder was never about the word at all. The wonder is the access. So here are 3 things to carry out of here. The first is simple. Abba never meant daddy. It was the full-grown, dignified word for father, warm and weighty at once. The word a 5-year-old and a gray-haired heir could both speak to the same man without changing a single letter. The people who first wrote it down translated it, Father, every time. The text tells you itself. The second is closer to home. If you are in Christ, that word is not describing a mood you have to work up. It is describing a legal fact about who you now are. Adopted, named, made an heir. And the proof is not your performance on your best day. The proof is the cry itself, the Spirit of the Son, putting the Son's own word into your mouth. And the third, here is the third. Think about who we are actually talking about. The one who flung the stars across the black and called the seas by name. The one before whom the burning ones cover their faces and cry that he is holy, holy, holy. That God did whatever it took, paid whatever it cost, emptied the cup to the very bottom in a garden in the dark, so that you, specifically, personally, you could turn toward him in the middle of your worst night and use the family name, not because anyone shrank him down to a size you could feel comfortable with. The exact reverse, because he reached all the way down into the dirt and lifted you up and brought you into his house. That is the gift hiding inside this one small word that so many people already loved. It was never just a soft word for the very young. It was always an open door into the household of God. Warmth and honor in the same breath. The word does not make God smaller. It makes you closer, and it tells you the closeness was bought to last. Abba, Father, both at once, forever. If even one line of this helped you see your Father a little more clearly today, leave it down in the comments. Because even one word helps this reach the next person who needed it and had no idea where to look. Subscribe so the next study finds its way to you, and send this to the person who came to mind while you were watching. Chances are they came to mind for a reason. And may you come to know, deeper than you ever have before, the nearness of the Father who calls you his own. Before you go, please leave a like and subscribe. I'm pouring my heart into this channel, and I truly need your support to keep going. Having you subscribe would be the greatest gift you could give me. It's not just a click. It's a sign that we're building something meaningful together. Thank you for staying until the end, and I'll see you very soon.